Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Rick Padilla.
Now that's really funny. Thank you very much. Well, welcome, welcome, welcome. For our guests and the newbies that have moved to our state, welcome to springtime in the Rockies. We had 80 degrees earlier this week, snow yesterday and today, and 60 tomorrow and 80 Sunday. So welcome to Colorado. I would like to, as we get started, would like to ask the veterans, active military, reserve military, our first responders and teachers to just please stand up for a moment if you would for me, please. Let's thank them. My name is Rick Padilla. I'm the Director of Housing for the City of Denver. Welcome to the third annual Housing Summit, Inclusive Communities. It's a solutions forum on housing. We brought together some of the best minds in the city, the state, and nationally. That's everybody in this room. Collectively, we're going to continue to look at the challenges and create opportunities from those challenges in our housing market, both within the city of Denver and regionally. Over the past 3 years, we've hosted the summit. The affordability challenge faced in our community have been increasing steadily. Under the leadership of Mayor Michael B. Hancock, we've put together some outstanding tools in our toolkit, and you'll hear more about some wonderful strategy going forward as we address not only housing, healthcare, jobs, and the connectivity through those three areas. But what I'd like to do to kick off the morning is to thank our host sponsor, Wells Fargo. They've been in the trenches with this since day one, 3 years ago when we hosted our first housing summit. Representing Wells Fargo today is Laura Orzilla, a senior vice president with Wells Fargo, a 16-year veteran with the company. She manages 43 stores, 778 team members, 74 ATMs, $5 billion in deposits, and $700 million in loans. A graduate of Western Carolina University, where she earned her bachelor's degree in business, and a graduate of Winthrop University, where she earned her MBA. Laura has spent the majority of her career in leadership positions across the country from coast to coast. In 2014, she moved to the beautiful state of Colorado. Let's give Laura a big Colorado welcome.
Thank you, Rick. Being in Denver now for 3 years, I can safely say that I'm still not quite familiar with these May snows, and Mother Nature has bested me 3 years running now on my tomato plants. So for those of you that planted last weekend. You know, it's nice to at least have that little slice of life, right? Where we can dig in the dirt, we can plant, and we can watch things grow. And you know, we're here today because we want to imagine a Denver where everyone has that nice little slice, where they too can plant tomato plants and watch the snow have them die off. But because that's part of the fun about being a gardener. But at Wells Fargo, you know, we believe that part of being a strong community is having an adequate supply of affordable homes. And that's why we're here today. And we're excited to be a part of this. I'd like to share with you 3 ways that Wells Fargo is currently addressing housing. The first way is through neighborhood revitalization. Last year in Colorado, Wells Fargo provided more than 160 community development loans and investments totaling over $200 million. In addition, Wells Fargo team members recorded 100 related service activities and nearly 450 hours of volunteer time. At Wells Fargo, we believe it's more than just about giving the money. It's also about teaching our team members how important it is to give back to the communities that we serve. The second way we address the housing issue is helping more individuals and families become successful homeowners. The 2 ways that are primary in this strategy is our down payment assistance and our home buyer education. Wells Fargo was successful in bringing Neighborhood Lift to Denver, creating 250 new homeowners and being able to provide grants through the LIFT program to nonprofits who cater to financial education. And then the last way is by increasing affordable housing inventory and financing. I'm proud to say that Wells Fargo Housing Foundation is solely dedicated to creating affordable and sustainable housing and investing in neighborhood revitalization efforts to build stronger communities. Since its inception in 1993, the Housing Foundation has invested more than $150 million in housing-related nonprofits across the community. Denver has been a frequent recipient of grants through our Priority Markets program, including 2 in 2015 to Habitat and Brothers Redevelopment for new housing projects. Since 2012, Community Lending and Investment Group, we financed 27 affordable housing projects totaling $250 million throughout Colorado. One such project is the Park Hill Station Apartments in northeast Denver near 40th and Colorado Boulevard that many of you may have driven past on the way here. So to quite frankly sum it up, we believe that affordable housing is critical to our communities, to the people that live in those communities, and we want to help. We know that this is not something that one organization alone can overcome. So we need all of you to partner with us to support the city of Denver, and let's bring more affordable housing to Colorado. We are proud to be a part of this forum, working alongside of you and everyone in this room to develop strategies and to promote solutions. Thank you for having us here today. Now it's a wonderful honor and a privilege to introduce Denver's 45th mayor, Michael Hancock. During his time in office, Mayor Hancock and his administration have eliminated the city's budget deficit, fostered a diverse economy, and restored much-needed services that were lost during the recession. With the drive towards increasing opportunity for every resident, he has prioritized innovative solutions to investing in the city's children and youth, increasing affordable housing and services for the homeless, supporting entrepreneurs, and making government work smarter for its residents. Prior to becoming mayor, he served on the Denver City Council for 8 years and was president of the Metro Denver Urban League. When I think about Mayor Hancock, I think about the way he believes in this city and the way he believes in all of us and what we can do to continue to make Denver an amazing city to live in. Please join me in welcoming Mayor Hancock to the stage.
Thank you, Laura. Would you all join me in thanking Wells Fargo once again for their partnership? Let me thank all of you for being here at the 3rd Annual Housing Summit. And I want to thank you again for the work that you do every day in helping us to identify solutions and opportunities around this very, very critical issue that we're dealing with in our city, throughout the state of Colorado. And I got to tell you, after being in Washington for 4 days this past week, is an issue that mayors all over this country are talking about. Washington was very interesting. We're going to stop there. Now, actually, we had a lot of great work completed, accomplished in Washington, in meeting with a lot of the departments who are working on this issue. But more importantly, it's always critical for me anyway to huddle with mayors and find out what are the issues they're dealing with and grappling with every day, just as we are grappling with issues. And housing is right up there with every mayor, whether I'm talking to Mayor Bowser in Washington, D.C., or Mayor Berry out of Nashville, Mayor Garcetti out of Los Angeles. This issue of affordable housing for not just the most challenged of us, but the workforce housing as well, is top of mind, and mayors every day are dealing with this. But also, we require a lot of partnerships, and I want to acknowledge the members of City Council who are here with us, arguably one of the most progressive city councils in dealing with the issue of affordable housing. I'm going to ask them if they'll just stand and be acknowledged as I call their names. First, Council President Albus Brooks is here. Councilman Espinoza is here. Councilwoman Stacy Gilmore, Councilwoman Robin Kanish, and Councilwoman Debbie Ortega are here as well. Would you give our city council members a round of applause? Obviously, it takes an entire team to make this happen, and I get to ride along every morning. I pinch myself with the reality that I work with some of the most phenomenal public servants who avail themselves to help deal with and address some of these most challenging issues. And I'm going to ask members of my team to stand up. I saw Chief of Staff Alan Salazar here, but all members of Team Hancock, if you'd stand up and just be appreciated for a moment for everything that you do. Go on, stand up. I know you're acting shy. There you are. Thank you all for being here. I want to particularly call out Rick Padilla and the Office of Economic Development for putting on this third annual summit and working hard every day to find solutions. I also want to call out our summit partners, not only Wells Fargo, who helped make this happen, but GHC Housing, PK Management, Polsinelli, Love Funding, Colorado Housing and Finance Authority, Freddie Mac, and JP Morgan Chase are all partners in one way or the other helping to make this summit happen. But more importantly, when we leave here, every day they're helping to make our vision come, helping our vision come to fruition. So we thank you as well to all of our partners. Yes, please. Thank you, Tony. So here in Denver and Colorado, seems every month we get a new report that Denver's housing costs have again increased. That means every month more families and individuals are being pushed to the tipping point as more of their paychecks go to their rent or mortgage. Or for those who are homeless, a roof over their heads move further out of reach. These challenges are not unique to Denver. If I laid out, it's rare when I don't talk about the affordability issue when I am outside of Denver and outside of the state of Colorado. From mayors like Mayor Suthers in Colorado Springs or Mayor Landrieu in New Orleans, our cities know we must step up for those experiencing homelessness and those trying every day to make ends meet. According to the National Low Income Housing Coalition, nationally, a worker in a full-time job must earn $20.30 per hour to afford a modest two-bedroom apartment for their family. In Colorado, that number is $21.12 per hour, and here in Denver, it's $23.60 per hour. So what does that mean for a city that is growing and experiencing some of the best economic success in the country, arguably the best economic success in the country? It means that today we are seeing nearly 3 out of 4 individuals experiencing homelessness are working. Did you hear what I said? 3 out of 4 individuals experiencing homelessness are working at places like construction sites and in the restaurants and hotels that we walk in and out of every day. It means our teachers and our nurses are paying far more than 30% of their incomes for rent. And it means that young professionals and millennials and families are stuck in rentals that they can't afford and certainly can't even begin to imagine home ownership. We all have someone we know, a neighbor, a friend, or family member who can't find a house to buy, had to move out of a neighborhood, or worse, lost their homes. Personally, my sister just moved back to Colorado, to Denver from Alabama. And as she looked for a home, she was heartbroken to find out the only place she could afford to live was in Thornton, Colorado. And as a community together with all of us, we have not sat idle in acting on these challenges. In 2013, we challenged ourselves to build 3,000 affordable homes over 5 years. We found to make it happen in 4. So we want to thank the Office of Economic Development, CHAFA, and the community developers who stepped up to make that goal possible. In 2014, we looked for innovative ways to house our homeless population and launched the Social Impact Bond Program to house and support 250 of those experiencing chronic homelessness. Thanks to enterprise and more than 20 partners, including many in this room, for supporting, investing, and partnering to make this happen. In 2015, we increased our services and support work for those experiencing homelessness, including the new Lawrence Street Community Center. And we want to thank our venerable and constant partner of the Rescue Mission, the Denver Rescue Mission. Y'all know who I'm talking about, for spearheading this idea and for helping to make it happen. Thank you, Rescue Mission, for all that you do and continue to do in our city. In 2016, the city came together to create the city's first dedicated fund for affordable housing, $150 million to build 6,000 affordable homes. It took tremendous courage and partnership with the city council and innumerable housing, development, and homeless advocates and stakeholders to make this happen. And in 2017, we know the need remains significant. Let me park there because there's some other things that took place as part of this journey. The office, or my office, also created the city's first ever Office of Behavioral Health, acknowledging the challenges we have with about 40% or more of our chronic homeless who are dealing with some form of mental health challenge or addiction. Reggie Herder has done a tremendous job in helping us to create nationally recognized programs today. So I want to just do a special shout out to Reggie Herder and all those who are working in the field of mental health, recognizing this challenge we have in Denver and throughout this nation today. Our affordable housing gap sits at more than 21,000 units. And so we must continue to create more solutions for our people. And that's why we launched the Office of Hope, Housing and Opportunities for People Everywhere, and brought on Eric Sullivan. I charged him with listening and learning about the housing needs here in Denver. And I would bet that he has heard from a majority of the folks in this room, or at least the person sitting next to you. He has also heard from families in Westwood and millennials in Rhino. He has been in community meetings and breakfast diners. He has been working with the homeless advocates, developers, and residents. I've seen him all over the city. Today, we not only better understand the challenges ahead of us, but we know the solutions cannot be just one program. It's about knowing our people, hearing their challenges, and finding unique solutions for their unique lives. That strategy starts today as we take a new approach to harness and direct our resources to meet the needs of our families and go beyond a housing first model. To live a great life, one that meets the promise of this great city, people need a good home, a good job, and good health. They also need mobility options and connections to get them there, which is why we are also focused on more transportation choices. But today, for creating housing and opportunities, our strategy is not just about building units. We're doing that. Denver is breaking down barriers and aligning jobs, health, and housing programs, and rethinking our funding to make impact investments that will create opportunities for every family, every neighborhood, and for people everywhere. We don't just want people to have a home. We want them to be able to stay in it, build their lives and families, and build their futures. That means we must go beyond putting a roof over someone's head. This is a new approach to leveraging departments and partner resources to connect people, our people, with jobs, good health, and a good home. When these three needs are met, people are empowered to succeed. I'm going to bring up Eric Sullivan. It's my pleasure to bring him up to the podium, who's going to give you a rundown of what we're going to do and how we're going to do it with this new approach. Help me to welcome the Executive Director of Hope, Eric Sullivan.
Thank you, and good morning. And thank you to my good partners, Rick Padilla, A.B. Ettinger, lots of my other colleagues who are here, Reggie Herder and Benny Milder, who have really helped me in my transition here from Philadelphia to working in this great city. Today's summit focuses on an issue that touches each and every person: housing, neighborhoods, and opportunity. Mayor Hancock has made these issues a top priority for Denver, and today we are, once again, leading the conversation nationwide on how we address these issues. He does it not because of notoriety, but because he grew up here and sees every person in this city as his neighbor. He only wants what's best for the people of Denver, and his spirit and compassion for humanity are what drive and brought me here to Denver and to do this work every day. As the mayor just noted, Denver has partnered with many of you in this room over the past 5 years to find innovative ways to connect people with good homes. The work the city has done thus far, the 3x5 challenge accomplished in 4 years, the new $150 million fund led by City Council, our social impact bonds, the Denver Day Works programs run by my good colleague Don Modis and his team, and many more, has shown a real commitment to tackling the city's affordable housing responsibility that we all share. And it has laid a foundation that will make our new strategy possible. As Denver prospers and more people, over 1,000 a month, come here for jobs, a healthy lifestyle, and opportunity, the challenge of growth becomes more urgent, the challenge in providing housing and opportunity becomes more focused, and the challenge to harness and leverage the city's resources to ensure that each person has a good housing choice becomes even greater. Today, we must solve for a housing market that has limited accessibility for all people, a market that offers the most inventory for the highest incomes and the lowest inventory for our families with low incomes. This creates an imbalance. High-cost housing sits unused, while voucher lists and wait lists and our shelter lines continue to grow. This is why we have seniors experiencing homelessness and construction workers living in our shelters. This is why teachers can no longer live to afford in the district that they educate our kids in, and our firefighters travel from our surrounding suburbs to help protect us. By helping those who are stuck in a rental market move into their first home ownership, we can open up accessibility all along the housing pipeline, from transitional housing to single-family homes. Our housing market works best when families can choose to move into home ownership in places and neighborhoods like Capitol Hill, and families can choose to move into rental units in places like Mariposa. To create paths that empower people to keep them in their homes, to help those experiencing homelessness find housing types of all kinds, like our tiny home village, and to expand access to homeownership. This connectivity requires an integration of good jobs and good health, so that way as we build the housing needed, we can help the person and the families moving in. All that is how we help to create inclusive communities. A good home, a good job, and good health are the keystones to a good life. As Mayor Hancock announced, the city will begin integrating and leveraging its programs and resources across the housing pipeline, from homelessness to home ownership, and the opportunities for jobs and health services to help make impact investments by leveraging our stakeholders and our foundation partners to provide people everywhere with access to a good life. Over the past 5 months, I have been fortunate enough to listen and to learn to many people in this room, as well as residents and families throughout Denver. Recently, one of our partners reached out seeking support for a senior woman, whom I will call Juanita. Juanita reminds me of mi abuela, my grandmother. She is 65 years old, a widow, and like many in our senior population, is living on a fixed income. For the past 17 years, Juanita lived in an apartment where her monthly Social Security income payment of $844 barely covered her monthly rent of $700. Juanita's apartment was also in a vastly changing neighborhood. And earlier this year, her landlord raised her rent to $1,400, a 100% increase. That was not affordable. But thanks to some of the quick actions and integrated work across multiple city agencies and partners, Juanita was able to move to a subsidized apartment where she also had easier access to health services to help stabilize her housing and her health. Housing and health. That is what brought her stability and a path towards a good life. While Juanita needed the support with her physical health, for others, like many experiencing homelessness, their physical and behavioral health challenges can be a barrier to finding and staying in a good home. Under our new strategy, we will expand the successful pilot programs, such as our co-responders initiatives, and develop and administer a peer-to-peer mental health services, counseling, and support programs that we not only support those individuals' health needs, but connect them to housing and put them on a path to opportunity. Another individual I had a chance to meet, his name is Kevin. He works in our Denver Day Works program. Kevin worked at a restaurant during the day, but due to family circumstances, spent nights in our shelters provided by our faith community, like Denver Rescue Mission, Catholic Charities, and St. Francis. Because his income did not allow him to afford the rent. Through the Denver Day Works program, we were able to connect him to a good job and with a local company. And now he is using that income to save for an apartment, and he is on the path to that success. Jobs and housing. For many residents, like Kevin, finding a good home and a good job that pays the rent or the mortgage go hand in hand. Our new strategy, among others, will seek to evaluate, expand, and better integrate our Denver Day Works program into our larger workforce initiatives, led by my good colleague, Denise Bryant, so that our program participants can find a good job that keeps them in their home and provides access to a house. We will also look to expand our Section 3 jobs program and better connect that work with our good partners at the Denver Housing Authority so that our low and very low income families can help find a good job and a good home to achieve good health. Housing, jobs, and health. Those are the three cornerstones of how we help create a good life. Finally, it was my pleasure to also meet Camille. Camille is someone that the mayor has spoken about a few times. She's one of the thousands in Denver who have good jobs and good health, but the market conditions I mentioned earlier were a barrier to finding a good and affordable home. Then the development at 40th and Colorado opened, which not only provided an affordable place to live, but was right near the University of Colorado, A-Line, our transportation line that's ever growing here in the city, which provided her a transit option to get her to work. In order to move our people through the housing pipeline towards a good home that is affordable, or to keep them in their home, we need to do more. Together, we can boost those efforts. We will work together, among others, and evaluate and develop funding programs to expand permanent supportive housing and improve respite care housing, working with a lot of our partners in this room. And together we will also expand and improve programs such as our renter eviction assistance initiatives and help to find more and innovative ways to preventing eviction as well as reducing the experiences of homelessness. These are just some of the actions that we will begin taking today. The strategy for tying housing to health services and jobs will better position the city and better position through public-private partnerships more help for people like Juanita, like Kevin, and Camille, as well as her kids and those like them everywhere here in Denver by providing those housing and opportunities. It is because of people like them that we do this work, that we reach more, that we can do more, and that we will do more together. With your support, leveraging your expertise and resources, we will make impact investments across the entire stream of housing affordability, from homelessness to homeownership. We will harness our resources, we will work together as a community to do better, because it is our responsibility to make certain that our senior women, our youth, our families, our workforce, our residents, our communities like the LGBTQ community, and communities throughout Denver have access to housing and opportunities to live a good life. During the last few months, I've studied a lot of spreadsheets, I've listened to stories, I've heard from people who are working hard and who have helped me identify a list in collaboration with my colleagues throughout the departments to identify 30 short-term action initiatives that we will look to deliver on in the next 6 months, tapping into resources and programs and expertise across city government, as well as leveraging our expertise of our community advocates and our partners and industry experts, developing and expanding upon the success we've had around public-private partnerships in this city. And I encourage all of you to visit our website, denvergov/hope, to see the list of initiatives and opportunities where you can help us move this initiative forward and be able to expand good housing, good jobs, and good health for all people everywhere. These are the new strategies that brings the mayor's strategic vision when he first laid out this office just over a year ago, for a city that works together, no matter your role in this process, to integrate our work, to harness and leverage our resources, to make impact investments in good housing, good jobs, and good health. So it is my honor to stand before you today and to ask you for your partnership in doing this work, and ask you to join us in this discussions we're going to have this afternoon about how we further expand our inclusive communities and begin to implement this strategy to develop and expand and meet our housing responsibility in this city. Thank you for your time.
Well said, well said. Thank you, Eric. Well said. The foundation's been laid. I want to again thank Eric and all the cities involved. Amy Edinger, our acting Executive Director of Office of Economic Development, Denver Human Services, the Honorable Don Modis, the Executive Director, the Office of Behavioral Health, and Reggie Hurdy, and all the other agencies who have stepped up, Rick Padilla, who are involved in this. And that's what we were hoping would happen with the Office of Hope, that we would bring down the silos and recognize that we have greater efficiency, greater proficiency, and greater opportunity by working together, coordinating these opportunities. To City Council for your continued partnership and support, to this community for having the compassion and the empathy, for urging us to rise to the challenge, and then the willingness to roll up your sleeves and be involved. To all of our partners who continue to make this happen. We recognize that we have a lot of work ahead of us. We're not done. We've had some successes. We've tested some pilots. And we recognize that in order to meet this challenge, we're all going to have to work together. Government cannot do it alone, and we need all of you. And so I know conversations that we'll be having today will help us set us on a smarter, more effective path to achieve what we've all set out to do. And I ask you to listen again to Eric's clarion call. It's our clarion call together, our partners and stakeholders and foundation community, to join us in making impact investments that connect jobs, health, and housing so that we can meet Denver's housing responsibility together. Again, thank you all for being here. God bless you, and we look forward to a thorough, substantive conversation.
Thank you, Mayor Hancock. Thank you, Eric, for setting and laying out a strategy to move forward in addressing housing, health, and jobs. For the media, the mayor and Eric will be available outside the exit for media interviews. Our next conversation will focus on today's changing federal housing policy landscape. As housing prices in Denver continue to rise, the federal policy that supports our housing work here at home is uncertain. While the details of policy change are unknown, today's conversation is an opportunity to reflect on the changing role of the federal government in our housing markets. I'm very pleased to welcome Chris Estes, the CEO and president of the National Housing Conference, a think tank based in Washington, D.C. Chris will moderate a panel with experts from across the country around federal housing policy. Chris, let's give Chris a big Colorado welcome.
Thank you, Rick. While the panelists are coming on up, we've got a bunch of folks in the back. If you would raise your hand if you've got an empty seat near you so people know where to come down. We can get folks up here. It's kind of like church. Everyone's hanging in the back there. Come on up. We don't want people standing up. We've got a new bunch of folks coming in. And I think we've got... All right, now is somebody coming up to move the podium or, okay. So I'm going to talk, while that is getting ready to happen, a little bit about the National Housing Conference, just to give you a sense of where I come from. We are actually an 86-year-old national membership organization, the first housing organization created in the country back in the Great Depression. And we really try to serve as a national resource on housing policy and housing implementation issues. We've sort of moved our focus from housing alone into a much more comprehensive community development lens, which I think really fits well with what you all are trying to talk about here today and doing in Denver. We look to have resources on local land use, the intersections of health, transportation, economic opportunity. In the last 5 years, we've particularly focused on messaging and framing and best practices in communication to help overcome opposition and build more political will and community support. This is particularly important now as we recognize that whether it's this administration, the previous administration, or even the 2 or 3 before that, we have not had adequate resources at the federal level, adequate flexibility, adequate predictability to really meet the nation's housing challenges. And so while we have seen places like Denver and many places around the country building political will and coming together to create solutions, we've got to figure out how to translate that kind of effective communication and support up to Congress and this and coming administrations to bring about the kind of resources and support that you all need. So I'm really excited to have a great group of panelists here today. We're going to look at what's happening at the federal level and what that may mean for you in Colorado and Denver in particular. So I'm going to start to my left and with Barbara and ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about what they do.
Good morning. My name is Barbara Fox. I'm with Freddie Mac. I'm really happy to be here today. I've been with Freddie Mac for 38 years now. I was privileged enough to be able to work with Rick Padilla for years when he was with us. I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs there, and as such, I manage a team that does congressional relations and policy work on housing issues. I'm really here today to provide a sort of Washington 10,000-foot perspective on what's going on there or not going on there with respect to housing, and to also share some of our more recent activities around affordable housing, including our new Duty to Serve activities, which Freddie Mac is spending a lot of time and energy gearing up to reach some of those markets that are underserved. So,
Michael?
Thank you, Chris. I want to thank Rick Padilla for the great weather. I just came in from Miami, Washington, D.C., where it was sunny, 90 degrees, not bad. But it's great to be in Denver. It's a great city, it's a great place. Mayor Hancock, great vision, and I'm sure you all are going to accomplish that. I've been around in affordable housing community development for over 30 years. I've been a state legislator. I served as Assistant Secretary for Public and Indian Housing from 2001 to 2005, and currently run an agency, a public housing agency, which does both public housing, Section 8, and manage a large loan fund, annual amount of about $40 million. We run through about $400 to $500 million a year. We're a large housing authority on the public housing side in the top 10. And we have a lot of challenges similar to you all here in Denver. The metro area, or Miami-Dade County, which is the local government that my entity is associated with, has a population of 2.7 million. We have 34 local jurisdictions within Miami-Dade County that we need to work with. The city of Miami and Miami Beach being the most well-known and largest of all of those. So look forward to having a great conversation this morning.
Thanks. Carol?
Great. I also want to say it's an honor to be here, and I got to travel to Denver quite often when I was with the federal government. We have both a multifamily center here and a single-family homeownership center, so got to know Denver a little bit from that perspective. So thank you for having me back. And I left Oakland, California, the most temperate climate in the United States of America. Never goes below 50, never gets above 75. But in spite of that, Rick, it is great to be here. So just in terms of my background on this, I'll keep it short, even though I have a very long background. You know, I started in local government writing like inclusionary zoning plans for a very high-cost city in Southern California. I then, for a number of years, many years, ran nonprofit housing organizations building affordable, mixed-income, mixed-use housing throughout the state of California in many high-cost markets, transit-oriented development, revitalized neighborhoods as well. So I have a lot of experience on the hands-on using a variety of the state and federal programs from a practitioner level, and then had the tremendous opportunity to come to the Obama administration in the early days of the transition. So I started in May of 2009. And was there for almost 6 years in both multifamily at HUD and then as the FHA commissioner. So have a lot of hopefully relevant background for us to talk about.
Thank you. And I also want to add my thanks to Rick for the invitation and the opportunity to be here with you all. I should have mentioned earlier that we have, the National Housing Conference has convened an inclusive community working group for the last 2 years, and Rick has been one of those key members. We actually were here last year when you had this meeting, holding a regional meeting, and many of our members are actually here today to speak. Rick did a good job of recruiting, tapping into that committee. Michael's one of those folks. And I also want to add my congratulations to the mayor and his staff and the HOPE initiative, which I think is really impressive and really will be, I think, an important national model in looking at this comprehensive lens of this intersection of housing with all of these issues. So to shift to our discussion, the beginning of the current administration, as all administrations do, comes with a great deal of uncertainty. Now that we're about 6 months into the administration, sort of what do we know and how are you all preparing for potential changes in policy, programming, and funding? So Michael, I'll start with you from the sort of PHA perspective.
Well, from a nuts and bolts approach, certainly we wish we knew more. But to the extent that we have information, we're gleaning it from all over, and we've actually produced spreadsheets of what we think our funding is going to be, both for public housing, Section 8, moderate rehab, et cetera, ESG, all of those programs. And we are tearing it at what if 100% of the skinny budget goes through? What if 50% goes through? What if 25%, 15, 10? And we are actually then talking with our partners on the community development side, since we also handle CDBG and home, to prepare them, looking at potentially shrinking our Section 8 HCV program to again accommodate potential cuts. Secretary Carson was in Miami about a month and a half ago. I spent a lot of time with him over 2 days, including 30 minutes stuck on an elevator. Some of you may have heard about it.
You were on the
TV star, certainly.
Yes. And I think there definitely are going to be cuts. I don't think it's going to be the 100%, but it's going to be significant, and we have to prepare for it in a very practical standpoint, regardless of the policy implications. You agree or disagree, it is what it is, and we're approaching it in that workmanlike fashion. There are obviously broader implications too. I think there definitely is a different mindset from the prior administration as to the role of government. It may be somewhat traditional Republican and Democrat, but I think it goes beyond that with this administration. It's not ideological per se. It's really looking for efficiency. Secretary talked a lot about holistic, approaching things holistically, and he still does. So I think what Mayor Hancock has done and Hope has done here kind of fits into that, the comprehensive approach to resources and bricks and mortar, and we can talk about that a little later, I think.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, the skinny budget that Michael mentioned is sort of a draft, projected draft of the 2018 budget, which had really significant cuts to many programs, particularly on the housing side. It would eliminate the home program, community development block grant program, and significant other cut, and there would be even more cuts need to be found to actually meet the goals of the skinny budget. I think most folks in DC agree that that is not even necessarily a starting point for where the budget's going to start in Congress, but that if you look at it from the most limited amount of change that Congress can't agree on a budget, and we have a continuing resolution, we still face increasing pressures that are going to lead to cuts. And even just on within the HUD budget itself, the growth of the voucher program will continue to eat a greater share of HUD's budget, putting pressure on other non-voucher programs. So that is in sort of like if you looked at a best case scenario, that we still are going to see some reduction in national housing resources. We won't know. We'll see a lot more how that goes. But Carol, from your perspective at the Turner Center, you guys do a lot of look at land use and decision making. How are you guys thinking about that transition?
Yeah, so a couple things on the transition, and I'll mention what we're doing at the Turner Center. I would just say one of my biggest concerns around housing has been, frankly, my biggest concerns about this administration have nothing to do with housing. So, okay, I'm done with my political comments. But I am concerned that the level of folks that Michael and I were within the administration, that this administration is woefully, woefully behind a transition schedule. And that concerns me with respect to the HUD budget, for example, because and I'm encouraged now that we have Pam Patnow as the nominee for Deputy Secretary, who is someone I think everybody up here knows well and feels really good about as a quality person coming in with a good heart and a good understanding of HUD. And that's what we've been missing for these number of months, but there's only been one Assistant Secretary nominated. And when you're in a situation where you have the OMB director who is a Freedom Caucus budget hawk, without those quality people in place at HUD, and no disrespect to Secretary Carson, it would be the same with any secretary coming in without the understanding of the machinery of government at that level. He needs veterans in HUD that can fight back within his own OMB, right? And this is something that every administration, this is not ideological Republican Democrat, it's, you know, the OMB versus the agencies and what they need. And so I'm happy that Pam's getting in there. I think that will give me some hope that some of the pushback will be there, and I think that's something to look for. In terms of what we're doing at the Turner Center, I will just say, I didn't mention that as my current position when I was giving my background, but it's a wonderful opportunity for me to be able to step back out of the day-to-day action and say what should we really be doing, both as a federal government, state government, local government, to deal with the challenges we have. The federal government is not going to save us, right? I think that's been clear for a number of years, and we have to look at both private sector innovation and local and state policies and what they can do. And I think Denver is doing a great job. And I'm basically putting out both policy work and innovation work that tries to lead people to new kinds of solutions, both at the federal level, like a lease purchase program. How can we scale that up as a pilot within FHA? No administrative only. So what can we do that doesn't cost more money? And what can we do at the federal at the state and local level. So we're spending a lot of time on local land use tools that I think we have something called the Housing Dashboard that's on our website that would be very, very helpful for communities as they think about the trade-offs between inclusionary zoning versus cutting parking requirements. Like, what do we do to get more cost-effective supply online at the local level? Because, as I said, the federal government's not going to save us.
And I think, we won't spend a lot of time on this because I think this is going to be a big discussion point today, but in the travels that I do and speaking around the country, and I know other folks do, this supply of housing and understanding how many more units need to be built to respond to your demand, local land use is really a big issue, and it's a big issue here, and I think really encouraging folks to think about how can we reduce the barriers to development while at the same time thinking pretty comprehensively about preservation of neighborhoods and preservation of affordability to balance sort of new development and growth, which is a sort of natural gentrification versus displacement. And those are big issues, and I know they're big issues here, and they're happening all over. So there's a lot of stuff to learn from what other communities are doing, and I think the Turner Center is a great resource. We hope we can be. But I think where this ties into the national administration is that there may be more support politically for removing regulatory barriers and hopefully increasing flexibility to help communities respond to some of these land use challenges. So I want to shift to Barbara. In your role at the GSC at Freddie Mac, how are you all thinking about the transition and what does it sort of mean for your work?
Well, Chris, I just want to reflect back on the way you started the question, which was to use the word uncertainty. Yeah. And I think that there is a lot of uncertainty in the world of housing finance, which is really my wheelhouse. I want to remind folks of what the mission of Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae's is similar, if not identical, which is to bring stability, liquidity, and affordability to markets. What does that mean for you as local practitioners? This means the GSEs bring stable funds, so when you need mortgage funds, when you need to fund an apartment building, the money is there. The liquidity is that the funds will keep flowing to the communities, to the homeowners, whoever needs to get access to the last community mission statement, which is affordable funds. And not just for homeownership, but for renters as well. Freddie Mac has been in conservatorship for the past 9 years. We are run by a regulator and a conservator, the Federal Housing Finance Agency. Congress will rewrite the rules of how Freddie and Fannie will play in the mortgage markets. It's being rewritten. Many of the reforms that Congress has proposed have already been implemented through various programs we have. This week, it's an interesting week to be here. We heard from the Treasury Secretary yesterday, who is we're starting to hear some of the administration's plans for how they feel and what they think about the mortgage market. Importantly, the Treasury Secretary considers this transition of the housing finance system to be a top priority. However, it falls behind other issues like healthcare and tax reform. He did, though, reinforce the importance of the 30-year fixed rate mortgage, which is something that we're very relieved to hear. The to-be-announced market, which ensures that you can lock in a mortgage rate. But he will not turn to these issues until the second half of 2017. Well, the last time I checked, it's about to be the second half of 2017. So uncertainty is a very good word. The only other thing I would add to this conversation is that I understand the administration is going to be releasing some more details of the skinny budget next week. So you may see some more articles and more press about what the intentions for the housing programs are.
Yeah, and Carol, your involvement in FHA sort of gets tied into this sort of reform of the government-sponsored entities. When we hear those GSE words, we sometimes forget how to explain that. But there's a whole look at sort of where the future of Fannie and Freddie and FHA and even the home loan bank system is part of that. Can you talk a little bit about your perspective on that?
Sure. So, I would actually say this is, in my view, an optimistic bright spot. Not that there's not continued uncertainty until Congress acts, but in the conversations I've been in, all the work that's been done congressionally over 8 years since the crisis, I think actually can and will come to resolution, maybe not this year, but because of the delay in other higher priorities. But I think there is a commitment in Congress and pretty close to agreement on there's nuances around the edges that are still very difficult, but I think that about what needs to be done with the GSEs, and I'm hopeful about that based on the conversations I've been having. And I would say the same thing about FHA. There have been proposals to quote unquote reform FHA that were pretty draconian early in Jeb Hensarling, who was the House oversight of FHA early on in his tenure there back in 2010. But really, I see that moderating to a place where there could be some good reforms for FHA that come out of this joint effort. I think it'll take some vigilance. And I know for most people, one of the things I just have to say, being kind of when you're in Washington and you're steeped in this stuff, and then you go back out to California, people don't really pay any attention to housing finance reform in California, and I bet most of you don't either. But the fact is, if it doesn't happen, and it's going to create the next crisis, and then you will need to care about it. So,
Right.
you know, I just think it is important to keep on everybody's radar that we are in a situation right now that is untenable for the lending institutions, really restricting access to credit right now because of all of the uncertainty, and that's got to change.
Right. Just a note for folks, if you're a low or moderate income person and you're buying a home, chances are you are getting, not chances are, you are getting an FHA mortgage. And so if that system is not there, that really cuts off that access for folks. If Fannie and Freddie are not operating in the way they are now, or not able to operate, then banks don't have liquidity to keep making loans. And so it is sort of at the 10,000, 20,000 foot level from on the ground discussions, but the impact is immediately felt. We did mention Pam Patnod, who's actually one of our board members at NHC, going into the deputy secretary position at HUD, and Pam's background previously was with the Ron Twilliger Foundation for Housing America's Families, and also the Bipartisan Policy Center Housing Commission. And so we all are very excited to have someone there who's been at HUD before, but also has been a housing advocate. We didn't mention Brian Montgomery, who appears to be the nomination for FHA, someone who also has been in that role, and I think brings another level of confidence and hopefully support to that. Michael, did you have
Yeah, I'd like to comment first on the budget process that Carol mentioned, just so that you all understand what it means, how it actually works when the departments get on the ground floor with OMB. You have your assistant secretary sitting across the table from the program person from OMB, and you're going line by line. You're going line by line, and you're making your case, they're making their case, and if you don't have that level of management senior enough to make that case, then the only party at the table is OMB. Because the secretary, I don't care whether it's a Democrat or Republican secretary, do not get at that level of the weeds. So, you know, the importance of getting these appointees. The flip side, however, might be, and I don't know whether this is intentional or not, if at the end of the day there is significant cuts to the HUD budget, regulatory reform that you mentioned is going to happen. We're going to have, because the money isn't going to be there to fund a lot of the extraneous stuff which currently we have to deal with. With all due respect to the folks from HUD, and I don't think anyone from Chicago is here from the Special Applications Center. I mean, as an example, that may be a segment that might have to go, which many of us in the public housing world might say, well, maybe that's not such a bad thing, because a lot of those things are also done at headquarters. So there is some dynamic there where there may be some silver lining in all this.
Let's talk a little bit about tax reform that came up. What does that mean for folks here on the ground when they hear tax reform being discussed, particularly as it relates to housing? I think for me, it immediately comes to mind the low-income housing tax credit program. But are there other, let's talk about that and sort of, I don't know if Carol, if you want to start with that, and then I can come to Barbara.
Sure. Well, on the tax credit, anybody involved in the low-income housing tax credit market knows that just the uncertainty or the prediction that we'd have tax reform with lower corporate tax rates has affected the low-income housing tax credit market probably 20%, at least in markets that I'm familiar with. So, you know, that's the big issue for housing and tax reform. I mean, we're probably, in my view, going to lose home. Okay, so gap financing, I think home is dead. It's my prediction. CDBG will survive, but not a lot of money. So, Michael, you agree with my prediction so far?
I agree.
Okay. So no gap financing, and then if your tax credit equity goes down, I mean the pressures that's going to put on your local $150 million fund, which is terrific, is just a lot of pressure to make up the gap. So I think even if the low-income housing tax credit program survives tax reform, which I'm optimistic that it will, if there is tax reform, that lower corporate corporate rates, I do think we're going to see an adjustment in the amount of equity. Now, there are some bills in Congress to try to gross up tax credits, and people are saying, well, maybe that will help fill the gap. I am less optimistic about those, but they're worth a good fight, but less optimistic.
And for those who don't know, the low-income housing tax credit program is really the main tool we have in this country to build affordable rental housing. It's targeted on its face at folks at 60% AMI, but it is often used in combination with other gap financing to target lower, and also is a place that often voucher holders can go if they have a tenant-based housing voucher to then reduce their rent further. So it really is a pretty critical tool for a range of affordable rental housing, and the ability to sort of build that effectively took a dramatic dip when after the election, because so many people speculated on tax reform coming and that corporate tax rates were going to decline, and so the amount of funding that people were willing to pay for those credits went down, and it's really made a lot of the development deals much more difficult. You're right. The plus side is that within Washington there is very strong bipartisan support for the program at the leadership level in the House and Senate in particular. We're honoring Representative Pat Tiberi, a Republican from Ohio, who's been a leading champion of the program and the New Markets program at our housing gala in June. But the pricing still will be a challenge under the new, if reform happens. There's still some question as to how quickly Congress can sort of deal with big issues like tax reform while this other stuff is sort of swirling around, and there's still health care to be sort of resolved in the Senate. So I think the time frame may drag out a little while, and whether that brings pricing stability or keeps the instability in that market, we're not sure. I want to shift to single-family housing finance for a second and talk about sort of how ongoing changes at the federal level may change single-family finance. Barbara, you talked a little bit about sort of Freddie's role in this, but I think in particular you guys have a new duty to serve element coming out, and talk to folks a little bit about that.
So in 2008, when we were in the throes of the mortgage crisis, Congress passed the Homeowners Recovery Act, which dictated some additional duties to the GSEs related to housing. So you're probably familiar with the fact that we have affordable housing goals, which drive some of our lending to not only folks at and below affordable or median income, but also drives us into lower wealth communities. So we've been operating with the affordable housing goals for some time. This is another regulation on top of the affordable housing goals, and combined I think they provide a very robust system of support for affordable housing. And Carol mentioned earlier a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, and I think the duty to serve rule for the GSEs is going to provide some of that oomph and that support to the mortgage markets, these especially underserved and nascent markets that have remained problematic for years, including a duty to go into manufactured housing, which will include not only real property manufactured housing, actual homes that are attached, but what's called chattel loans, which are personal property loans, where 80% of manufactured housing market where those loans are made. We'll go deeper into rural housing. I would reflect back that we're hoping to get back into the LIHTC market around rural housing and for affordable housing preservation. Both Freddie and Fannie last week or the week before published our plan for going into the rural, manufactured housing and the affordable housing preservation markets. We have an over 100-page plan about how over the next 3 years we tend to go deeper into those markets. I would highly recommend that if you have a chance to read, 100+ pages, it lays out in great detail how the GSEs intend to support those markets. And I think this is just so important as federal uncertainty and funds start to dry up, that there are other players that move into this market to provide support and funding to these areas. We're looking for innovative solutions. We're looking for partners on the ground to help us, because these are tough markets, there's no doubt about it. And I would recommend that you go to FHFA's website, which is www.fhfa.gov/duty to serve. You'll find both plans, and importantly, it invites you, the practitioners, the folks that we need to hear from. We're doing as much outreach as we can on these programs because we want to hear from you about what you think about the plans. How can we improve them? What needs to be tweaked? What have we not thought about? And help us to build partnerships for these markets. So.
Yeah, for an example, for a lot of low-income folks, buying a manufactured home was really the typical path to home ownership in this country, particularly in more rural or suburban areas. I spent most of my career before DC in the South in North Carolina. It was 28% of our housing stock in the 2000 census. But when you buy a manufactured home, you may own a house and you may own the land under it, but you can't sell it to someone and they can go to a bank and get a loan to buy it because there was no secondary market for that purchase. And that's where Fannie and Freddie moving into that space to actually bring that secondary market so that banks could actually lend to someone who wanted to buy a quote-unquote used house the way you would a stick-built house, really could change the economic opportunity for folks for whom this is an affordable, accessible option. But once people own it, it really becomes almost like a car in the sense that it depreciates and maybe the land still has value. So this really can be an important element for that segment of the population, and for large parts of this part of the country, it's also a really important housing stock. There's been a tremendous amount of improvements in construction, but these kind of little things sometimes get lost in the details as to what they mean for people, particularly when you're trying to improve housing in your community, and that's one thing that can bring more stability and value.
Chris, I'd like to flip just quickly a little bit back on LIHTC to also mention the criminal actions that have taken place and which centers in South Florida to developers that my entity have dealt with. And I think that lends a certain element, which could affect, the other issues related to looking at the Cantwell bill or other measures to try and support the program in its present form. I think there are going to be suggestions for changes to the structure and some of the requirements, and that's going to take an interesting role, I think, during the discussions going on. And I can assure you, because I've talked to the U.S. attorney who's involved in these prosecutions, he's come in to see me and he is just not looking at Florida. They're talking about this as a whole throughout the United States. So stay tuned.
Right. So,
and Chris, can I just go back to the single-family finance, because I do think that the other big chatter in Washington is about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and do we fire the director? Do we create a legislative commission? So there's a lot of tension between Republicans and Democrats that my belief is that the crisis was created by unregulated subprime mortgage entities, most of whom don't exist anymore, not by the GSEs, not by FHA, and yet Right now, if you're a lender, you've got a new regime of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which I think was very, very necessary. But also what came with that is this punishment of lenders for their past acts. Whatever the, it's like being any prosecutor. If I can't get you on murder, I'm going to get you for breaking and entering, okay? So I can't get you for all this crap you did 15 years ago, but I'm going to get you for not dotting your I and crossing your T's on an FHA loan. And like that is kind of what has emerged out of this. So very well-intended necessary regulatory changes. I do think you're going to see not a wholesale getting rid of this, but I think there is an appetite to reflect on some of these rules a little more nuancedly now that we've been living with them, change how lenders have to service and all of these things. Otherwise, the major banks are not doing FHA loans anymore. And that's a problem for the system. And so I think there is going to be appetite for some changes there around the enforcement and regulatory environment, which I think will be positive.
Yes, yeah, I think so, especially this sense of how to bring, as you mentioned, the larger banks back to FHA and how to free up community level banks from regulations that are probably not really designed for the work they're doing. Overall, this larger challenge of how do we get more access to credit to folks to be able to purchase homes, not just in higher cost cities like Denver, but everywhere. That is not happening at the rate it needs to in the country. Obviously not losing sight of safe, sound, and sustainable lending and trying to make sure we don't repeat some of the past problems. I will mention the Urban Institute just put out a nice research piece this week that really looks at the crisis and notes the amount of predatory refinance and how they think that was actually one of the major triggers of the housing crisis that people have not paid attention to. And that was something that was really targeted to communities of color who were homeowners who had a lot of equity in their home but maybe were cash poor. And you saw some of the more devastating foreclosure dynamics happen in those neighborhoods due to that refinanced activity. And I think we've sort of lost it in some of the political scoring that people have tried to make on each other about whose fault it was. But I think we particularly want to protect those communities so that we're not losing that equity and wealth going forward. Michael, I want to come back to multifamily housing and the sort of changes going on, particularly within the PHA world, but there's the rental area demonstration project, the sort of conversion of public housing into more of a public-private partnership. How are you all looking at that, and how do you think that may move forward?
Well, I think it's going to continue. I think the last administration, and Carol was a big part of that, have done a good job of laying the framework for the public-private partnership and use of RAD, the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program in Section 8, as a vehicle to move that forward. Now, of course, the debate is if you use Section 8, that then puts pressure on the growth of Section 8, then which pushes out these other programs. Well, maybe that is the way it has to happen, and we may have to just admit that that's the future. For years, my predecessors at the Miami-Dade Public Housing and Community Development Department did not include RAD as part of their PHA plan. It is now part of our plan. And I think HUD is being smart in looking at, while you may have some debt, you don't necessarily have to cash it all out if the numbers work at a particular project to do RAD, and we are looking at that. So I think this administration, and I think especially with Pam Patnow being there, and she understands that, I think that will proceed. I think Secretary Carson likes the idea of using LIHTC to do development, and I think as he understands that RAD works with LIHTC very well, or can, that it will get support at from his office too. So I think RAD will be with us, and public housing is going to be very, very different. It's a tough sell, though. When you're talking to residents and you tell them it's not going to be public housing, it's going to be under Section 8, you got to take a lot of time to explain it to them, and otherwise, you know, you can set yourself up for a lot of concerns.
Mm-hmm. So we've got just under 10 minutes left, and I thought I would give each of you sort of an opportunity to sort of send a message to the folks here in Denver, your advice for them based on what you see, your experience and background in DC, as to what they need to be thinking about or looking to respond to some of the challenges the mayor talked about this morning. Anybody want to go first?
I'll go first.
You go first, Barbara.
I'll go. So my best advice is to buckle up. This administration is unpredictable and slow. I think we've sort of laid out how decisions and it ain't over till it's over kind of thinking in Washington will just continue to play out, whether it's budget issues or tax issues. I do think you're starting to hear from some key players on housing issues, and I just want to re-emphasize to you what we believe is an important new initiative, which is our duty to serve obligations and rule that is coming out. There's so many ideas and proposals and innovations that we've built in to our plan over the next 3 years. So for example, we have some rad suggestions in our plan, and we're looking into getting deeper into things like energy efficiency work that they do in our multifamily. I'd also mention it's not usually thought of as a multifamily issue, but in rural areas, over 50% of the renters there actually rent single-family homes. So we're trying to find a way to bring a program that will make affordable and provide protections to folks who are renting single-family homes in rural areas. There's just a bunch of ideas. We're looking for partnerships. So I will leave you with a little bit of optimism and not so much down.
We're looking at dealing with our budget concerns by talking to our members of Congress. And we're fortunate we have the head of the House subcommittee that oversees HUD, Congressman Diaz-Balart, comes from South Florida. The downside is that the HUD budget is also mixed in with transportation. And when you get things, what happens is that the subcommittee chairman gets a dollar amount and he says, okay, this is how much you have to cut, and you work it out within your jurisdiction. So there's going to be some gamesmanship between transportation and HUD. HUD is definitely not in the superior position. Nevertheless, I think working with members of Congress probably may end up getting you more than what you might get in challenging the administration directly because things are so fluid there to some extent. But working with the administration on changes to regulations, streamlining things, getting rid of things that just don't make sense in the world of HUD, and there's a lot of that, okay? Some of it very well intentioned, but just because the way things work there, it takes a long time to change. I think there is much more chance for change in those areas and to happen perhaps faster than people think. So that's the strategy we're taking, and it might be something that you all may want to think about.
Okay.
Well, I agree with both of your comments, and just on the working on the administrative side, I would say there are a number of national organizations, for example, if you're in affordable housing development, that are working on how can HUD allow more portfolio management? How can we put more projects together so we have one audit instead of 5 audits that each cost $10,000 a piece? How can we do one? A number of these kinds of issues that we were working on, lots of those issues, and I think made terrific progress in the time that I was there, but there is so much more that can be done, and it's not a partisan issue. It's just making government work more efficiently, as the mayor said. So I would be looking at those opportunities. On the other hand, I'll go back to what I said, federal government is not going to save you, and I would really continue to double down. I think Denver's doing a tremendous job on all these issues, but I would look at private sector innovation around things like driving costs. I don't know whether there's much, if any, say, off-site construction, modular construction going on in the Denver area, but I'm working with a company that's going to open a factory in California because with the cost increases, at least in the Bay Area, are just not sustainable. You know, the incomes are flat and the construction costs are going up for a whole variety of reasons. We have a lack of labor, all of these reasons, but the industry has to get more efficient as well. So we can't just be asking the government for more money and because we're not going to get it. I mean, we can keep asking, but we're not going to get it. So I think getting innovative about what your private sector can bring, whether that's in mortgage product, working with GSEs, or whether that's in construction, is really important. And then back to your point earlier, Chris, this getting the market, the supply of new housing at the market level, working more cost efficiently, getting it online faster, and you guys do it a whole lot faster than lots of other places, so congratulations. But you know, really ensuring that you're squeezing everything out of the costs and the timeline so that you can deliver quote unquote market rate unrestricted housing to kind of people up in the middle income scale, so that those people aren't putting pressure on the lower people down the rung. Unless we're looking at the whole spectrum of supply and the whole spectrum of demand, we're not going to solve it just with you know, working at the extremely low income level. We got to work up the scale.
Yep. Right. Thank you. A few comments I will add to theirs in advice. One, I would just say, this stuff is hard. You know, this is not, the discussion of sort of housing and neighborhoods is probably, it and schools are probably the two most emotional issues that happen at local communities. Some of the most sort of deep and divisive things that have happened in our country were really around segregation of land use. And not just in the South, but all over the country. So I think when you talk about the issue of housing, in fact, I would encourage you to use the word housing a lot less, because it's not a word that engenders or sends a picture of something that's desirable. It feels corporate or barracks-like. What you're really talking about is home and communities and opportunity. And I would focus a lot more on those words, because you want people, not just the people in this room, but everybody outside of this room in the city of Denver and the greater region, to feel like this is something that is going to benefit them and that they have a stake in. It needs to feel inclusive, because it can get divisive if there's a sense that a lot of effort is being made to help people with housing, when chances are 80% of the people in this region feel like their housing costs are too high. And so if there's a sense that somebody is sort of winning at something they're struggling with, you immediately have a lot of political pressure that prevents more comprehensive solutions. So keep thinking about how this can be a big win-win for everybody. You have a challenge that a lot of cities wish they had, which is a lot of people want to come live here. Heck, I'm the one person who doesn't complain about your weather. I love snow, love to ski, love the mountains. I'm living in DC, where I know how hot our summer's going to be. Every day that is below 80, I sort of celebrate, because I know for the next 3 months. But you have this great challenge, and there are lots of places around the country struggling with this. I was just in Carol's stomping grounds in Northern California, and they're trying to figure out how to deal with their undersupply. But if any of you were in the breakfast session this morning, one of those cities with the fastest growing housing costs is Dallas, Texas. And I pretty much guarantee you that there's not too many places in the country that have less restrictive development environments than Texas, yet Dallas can't keep up with its supply. And their costs are rising faster than Denver's. So acknowledge that this is a big problem, but it's a good problem to have. You need a strong, vibrant, diverse urban core, but you need to think regionally too. If the greater MSA does not see this as including them and what the benefit is, then you get parochial, and there's nothing more damaging to local efforts than when people start dividing out, well, my neighborhood versus your neighborhood, or this section of the city or the MS or our greater region versus the other. And I think that the stuff that we're talking about, the opportunity for people to have a safe, decent, affordable place to live, for their kids to go to a good school, for them to have access to jobs, things that every American wants, needs to be our guiding principles to sort of bring us together. And I hope that this day will be a catalyst for this work to go out. But most important is not the plan itself or this comprehensive lens, but how you really communicate it with the rest of the folks in this region and how they feel a part of it. Because we can have all the great ideas, all the great examples, all the great opportunities, but if it turns into a divisive sort of, this isn't for me, you won't get there. And this stuff is complicated. We want to deconcentrate poverty, but we don't want to have people displaced from their neighborhoods. Those two things don't often work well together. We want greater access to credit and opportunity, but we don't want to see people being taken advantage of with predatory lending. So I'm excited for however we can be a resource for the work you're doing today. I'm really excited with the team you all have and the plan you all have. So join me in thanking the panelists for their comments today.